Man, like the conception of hell is so messed up when you think about it because
It's so messed up.
the Bible is clear that the path to hell is a wide one, the path to heaven is a narrow one. So that means that vast majority of humanity, including all those who don't believe, those who have never even heard of Christianity, are getting thrown into hell for eternal torture. Like that's super messed up if I'm, anywhere empathetic of other human beings, like, you might
Yeah.
as well
Yep.
in that scenario, you might as well just have not created humans at all, and there wouldn't be the overwhelming, net suffering, in comparison, very little net happiness you would have in life and, for the few people in heaven.
But that just makes too much sense, Drew. I'm sorry. It sounds like you don't have faith. It sounds like you lack faith.
Sorry, guys.
Drew, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I'm stoked to have you as a guest. For anybody listening, I had posted on Reddit, as I do frequently, looking for guests, and you reached out. And I thought, at first, I was like, oh, this seems like a cool individual based on what you submitted. But then when you sent me your second email, what a roller coaster. What a
It was
roller. Like, I
long.
was just, well, it was good though. It was good. Like, I kept reading and reading, and it was just, there was so much content there that I automatically knew. I was just like, done. This is going to be a great interview. But enough from me. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what's going on, and how you were raised in the church.
Sure. So, thank you for having me on, first of all. So I'm Drew, and originally from Alabama. Grew up in Birmingham, in Tuscaloosa for 12 years, while not being an Alabama fan, which is a very interesting story. And then my family just recently moved to Mobile. Just graduated from Clemson University. I was in honors college. I was an RA the last 2 years. That was a really
Wow.
great experience.
Yeah.
Now I've moved to Eastern North Carolina, the other Carolina, I should say, on the East Coast, and really close to the beach, and have what I call my first like professional job. I've had, RA and work in this food service and things like that. Um, but yeah, I grew up very Christian in an evangelical household, and kind of surrounded by it, like the wider culture. Like you get you go to random events that have nothing to do with Christianity, and there's an invocation, like a very explicitly Christian prayer, which kind of muddies the waters of separation of church and state for sure.
Right.
Um, yeah, I guess I could start uh, kind of from the beginning. I'm gonna look at
Yeah,
my
sure.
notes here. I love to write notes, and one of the things about being a writer is you always go back. I'm like, oh, I should have said this. I should have said that, and I
Yes.
try to preemptively prevent that from happening. But ultimately, like I know, like there's something I'm gonna miss because there's always more.
I feel like that's the creator's curse, is no matter how well you do, you think about it an hour later and you're like, ah, dang it. Like, I should have said this. I should have done this. I should have, yeah. Yeah. You're never going to be
Exactly.
fully satisfied.
Yeah. Um, so I kind of go chronologically here. So I grew up in the Catholic Church, or sorry, I was baptized in the Catholic Church as an infant, so I didn't have any control over that. I mean, they dipped me in the water and did the little blessing thing. Because my parents were in the Catholic Church at the time. Um, my my dad grew up in very Catholic household along with his sister.
Interesting.
Um, and my parents ended up leaving shortly thereafter. So a little bit of an awkward situation. Catholics, one of the phrases they use is like, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. So I guess that they try and include me there. Um, so I really didn't have a lot of experience with the Catholic Church through my parents, obviously, because they left like shortly after I was born.
Do you know
Uh,
why? Was there any particular reason, or they just weren't interested anymore?
Yeah, I talked to my dad. I brought it up again a few months ago. One of the things was like putting Mary on a pedestal, like equal with Jesus, maybe even more so. Um, and there are a couple of other kind of theological reasons, but that was one of the big ones. Um,
Interesting.
but yeah, so I really grew up in the Evangelical Christian church. So, kind of non-denominational churches, like with
Which always
the
means
kind of
Baptist.
fun names.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
I was about to say, like, so I went to the Church of Brook Hills. That was Southern Baptist Convention, and
Yep.
so we're like basically or affiliated, and so were all the other churches I would go to. Church
Interesting.
of Brook Hills is interesting because David Platt went there. He was the guy who got pretty famous around the country because Trump showed up. President Trump showed up unannounced, and he ended up praying for him. And kind of there's some splintering in the Christian community and just overall politics, I guess. He also was the International Mission Board president of the SBC. So he's a pretty prominent guy, like to have outside of Birmingham, Alabama. Um, I was taught to pray very early on, like when I was really little. Like that was kind of my nightly routine. Like, thank you God for this day and for whatever happened, and please protect. There are people. There's this girl named Lydia. I think she had cancer or something, but like for many years, like that was my routine. Is like pray for Lydia. She gets better from
Oh,
cancer, which that's good. Like you should hope for the best of people, of course. But it was really more of a thing that was hoisted onto me. um,
yeah.
I wasn't able to think for myself. Um,
Well,
and
and then
I,
also you think if, say, a child dies of cancer, how do you tell your child their prayers didn't work? How do you explain that to them? Or how do you put that on a kid that, well, you tried your best, you prayed, and God heard it, but he just chose not to, you know?
yeah, it brings up this dilemma. I guess I'll talk a little bit later about like God's either just straight up evil and allows evil to happen, even if he's not, or he's just like kind of a klutz and like doesn't have full control and
And should
whatever.
not be in charge of things.
But which calls into question the very existence of designation of a god like a lord, if
Yeah.
you're one or both of those things. um yeah, taught to pray. um I've always been very naturally curious and independent nonconformist. Like when I was a little kid, I was always asking like, why do I have to wear this or wear that? um I was aware of social constructs way before I knew what the term was.
That's funny.
um and then I was very open to trying like new foods and like later in life, or recently, like learning about even new religions. Like I have no interest in becoming a Muslim, but like I went to an Islam um, like awareness dinner and learned a lot of really interesting things about the faith and like
Yeah.
amazing food, like Middle Eastern foods, like one of my favorites. Um, a lot of my
That's really
friends were
cool.
there. But yeah, just being open minded. I don't have to like accept all these things, but like I can still like have a better perspective because like man, the Christian perspective on Islam is like, I mean, for way too many people is that, oh, they're all radical terrorists. Like it's bad.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, like that's one of my critiques of Christianity is like it can get really really closed minded really quickly.
Well, and then
Um,
also, if you apply the same logic, if you're like, okay, fine, well, then you guys are a bunch of white supremacist, racists who shun people and don't actually follow the rules and don't love thy neighbor, they get upset. And you're like,
I
what? I thought we
do.
were naming stereotypes. I thought that's what we were just doing tonight. Sorry, I thought we were just, I didn't realize it only applied to some people.
They do, and I'll bring that up again when I talk about like Jesus. Like not a bad legacy if at least according to the Bible. Uh, but yeah, anyway, I was in this organization called Upward Football. Sure, people have heard of it. It's like this evangelical, I guess, non-denominational organization where you play like flag football, but it's also
Interesting.
like, hey, we worship Jesus and stuff. And so one day after a practice in our neighborhood, actually, my my towering tight end, former Fresno State tight end, sat us down. He's like, hey guys, like, gave us the whole spiel. Like, you guys want to get saved and avoid eternal torture in hell? I don't think he put it like that, but um,
I don't know, man.
like,
Some of them do.
there's no other frame of reference. And it's like, yeah, sure, and did the little sinner's prayer, and voila, now I'm a Christian. Um,
And how old were you at that point?
I think I was like 7 or 8,
See,
so
that's so much to put
I
on a
was really young,
child.
my brain was definitely not fully developed.
Yeah, and you also don't have any concept of consent or let me research this and get back to you or anything. It's like, "Oh, if I don't do what you just asked, I'm gonna burn forever. Sure, I'll do it." Like,
Yeah, like, who wouldn't take that? Like, if that's all the
yeah,
information you had,
yeah,
why not? When you're 8 years old, now I
right.
have a lot more information to
Well, and then
base
it
my
calls into
judgment
question
off of.
how legitimate that is, right? Like, it calls into question, can you really be saved, quote unquote? Like, did you really do that if you
Exactly.
didn't know what all your options were?
And also, like, is it really being saved and truly believing if it's super coercive? If I hold a gun to someone's head and say, you're a Christian or you die, like, most people are going to choose to say they're Christian. I mean, this literally happened with indigenous people across the Americas. Like, they, put a gun there, whatever, threaten their life and say, if you don't become a Christian, then you get unalived. And I'm sure many of these people did it just out of self-preservation and
Totally.
didn't actually want to follow or did follow the Christian faith.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's like, Give me all your money." "No." "Give me all your money or I'll kill you." "Oh, well, okay, I guess you get all my money." Like, and
It
then
boosts the
walk around saying,
numbers.
"Yeah, they gave it to me. They just gave it to me. They handed it to me." And you're like, "Yeah, well, that's not how that went." Yeah.
Yep. um yeah, as I mentioned earlier, my grandparents on my dad's side are really devout Catholics, and so occasionally go to mass with them. I stay at their house on weekends, twice a year or whatever.
Did
um
it bother them when your father left the church?
I think, yeah, I think some, but I haven't seen any of that, and my dad hasn't talked about it a lot,
Yeah.
so I don't know that much about it. I'm
Yeah.
sure they are to some extent.
Yeah.
So a lot of Catholics don't believe that even if you're Christian, you don't go to heaven.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yep.
but it was interesting to contrast like the almost rock concert atmosphere of my immediate family's churches with the very antiquated like Roman Catholic mass, accompanied with like Latin singing and strong smelling incense. And they would kind of encourage me, I guess, more recently, um, when I was in high school and early college, like kind of joined the faith. Like they gave me a little booklet with some of their theology and stuff. Um, I don't know where that is, but but
Oh,
yeah,
straight to hell.
um, yep, straight to hell, I guess. Now my other grandparents are a different story. Like they don't go to church at all unless like we invite them to Christmas or Easter, and of course they'll come. Because we had special kind of Christmas concerts or something
Yeah.
um, growing up. But they're really not religious at all. Like the really only time they bring it up is when others bring it up and they kind of applaud and whatever. Um, well, yeah, I don't see any evidence that they're very religious, which is kind of interesting. And so like that relationship with them is different in that it's not in some ways like my other grandparents like revolving around religion.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
So I think, as I said, I moved to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, from Birmingham, about an hour away. But it felt like so much more to a little kid like me, um,
Yeah.
to T-Town. And we ended up going to TCAT, the church Tuscaloosa, and Capstone Church, mostly Capstone. I was involved in like youth groups, Bible studies, VBS, even acted for a year um, with my brother on the Sundays. And I did that not
That's so
because I was a super devout Christian, but because I didn't want to be outdone by my brother.
yeah, yeah. Sibling rivalry trumps your salvation every time, every time.
Exactly.
And at the
And
time, do you remember believing it? Like, was it pretty simple for you to just be like, "Oh, yeah, I believe it. That makes sense." Or did you question it at the time? Do you remember what you were thinking about it at the time?
I don't think I allowed room for myself to critique it at all. I was
Mm,
kind of just I'm a
interesting.
sponge, I'm absorbing all of this.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, I don't think I had the mental capacity yet or the frame of reference to really go in any other direction.
Yeah.
Um, and then let's see. Yeah, like looking back, like at the churches I went to, like they were so white and conservative, and like it really bothers me even today that like there studies have been done on this that like Sunday morning during church is like the most segregated time period of the week because we still
Wow.
have very racially divided churches, like basically have white churches and black churches in many parts of the U.S. Um, and it's a legacy of slavery and imperialism and all that stuff, but like it still very much has an impact today.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess I'll go over a few like moments that kind of defined like growing up in
The
the church. Like,
highlights. Yeah.
yeah. So there was this movie called Left Behind about the apocalypse, and I watched it
Ooh,
at a family's
yes.
family friend's lake house. Scared the living
Traumatizing children since 1997.
exactly scared the living shit out of me,
I'm
and
telling you.
planted a seed that instilled great fear in me. Um, and now looking back, I realized that experience was an excellent example of the coercive power of Christianity rather than the true belief of my own volition, which we've already talked about.
Mhm.
Um, and then another moment was we went to Panama City Beach for a youth retreat. They got a big conference down there, and they had this concert. I think the first night, and it was it was pretty loud and just a lot to take in. I ended up passing out. Um, it was just a
What?
very traumatic experience for me. I think
Like,
I don't know why. Like I do have vasovagal syncope, which makes it easier to pass out. I found out later, and that's happened quite a few times since in non-religious contexts. But
is it
it was
like is it like strobe lights that trigger it, or is it breathing related? How do you just pass out?
I don't know. There were probably strobe lights. It was loud. Probably didn't have enough water. All the above.
Yeah, that's wild. That's scary.
Yeah, that was. I didn't look fondly upon that.
I
Um,
bet.
and like in high school and early college, I would be like just on guard the day before and very anxious before like a flight or a long drive, and I would try not to sin the day before for fear that if I died in an accident without repenting, God would send me to hell.
That's wild. How that's like, how can people see these behaviors in their children and think, "That is normal, I'm happy for them. They're getting closer to God." It's just wild. Rapture anxiety is a real thing. It is a real,
Totally.
true thing.
Yeah, it's very much just carrot on a stick philosophy that you don't do it because it's right. You do it because God told you so. Um,
Yeah. And, like,
it's
with
like
these behaviors, when you say, "Oh, I made sure not to sin the day before in case I died on a flight," or something like that, part of me thinks, "How do parents not look at this and feel concerned?" And then part of me wonders if those parents are thinking, "Yeah, you could die on a flight. You should repent your sins," you know?
oh
Like, w
goodness.
it goes both ways.
Yeah, I never really told my parents like much of this stuff because
Yeah.
I don't know. I had some issues with like keeping a lot of things inside of me and like feeling ashamed and not wanting to tell other people. And it took me many years to really come out of my shell. Um, and now, like, I go to therapy and like do all this
Yeah.
stuff that's like
Good for you.
stigmatized in many Christian circles. And like,
Right.
I'm on this podcast. Like, I've come a long way, but like, it's very much just um, this line of thinking that like, oh, I have to defer to God on everything, and if He doesn't say this in this prayer, you know, um, and like this emptying the vessels, like I think the whole pattern of church and like the music is like go into church and you realize how broken you are as a human and you've sinned against God and you're all terrible. But oh, Jesus swoops in for the Sunday to save your soul and renew you for the week ahead. It's like this kind of soul crushing process that happened every week, and I kind of started to
Yes.
slowly realize like. the whole song structure is built to do that. This is very um, Stephen Hassan's bite model kind of esque
Yeah.
behavior. That's more psychology than really even religion, almost.
Right? But isn't it interesting how they go so hand in hand many times?
Yes,
Whether
absolutely,
that's a good thing or a bad thing, yeah, just case by case
definitely.
basis, but yeah.
Um, Another kind of snapshot, I would lie awake when I was trying to go to sleep, especially in high school, maybe early college, and I would just be absolutely paralyzed at the thought of living forever in heaven. I was more concerned about heaven than hell at some points, thinking,
Yeah.
I would go to heaven as a practicing Christian who's been saved. I couldn't stand the thought of like having to be conscious forever, as that was overwhelming to me. And like, oh, you
Yeah.
have to you're you're forced to worship like a jealous god forever and sing like these cringy songs. Like, doesn't sound very fun to me.
I
Um,
tell you, yeah, when I was a kid, my least favorite parts of church, I'm talking like actively suffering, was when everybody was standing up and singing the hymns. And when I found out that we were all going to be angels singing hymns in heaven, I was so upset. I was so like, I knew that I had to go there because otherwise it was hell. So I knew that that was where I had to go. But I was so upset at the idea of like singing with the angel choir for the rest of my life. I was like, well, when I get to heaven, will I at least enjoy? Whoop. Sorry, hold on. Headphones get out. I was thinking, will I at least enjoy it when I go to heaven? You know?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, like it really doesn't make any sense because if you scientists have done studies on people who are dead and like they can't feel anything. Like their pain receptors are done. So like even if there is a hell, like you're not going to be able to feel anything.
That's a great point. That is a
But then,
very
well,
valid point.
Christians, they always have some crazy kind of argument. They're like, well, it's your soul that actually feels the pain. Like, I wasn't feeling any pain before I was born, though. That's interesting.
Right. Yes. Yes. And then those same people say that life begins at conception and you're like, which is it? Which is it?
uh, some people have heard Genesis 2:7 that life began at first breath.
R- Exactly. Listen, there's no more dangerous weapon than someone who's actually read the Bible and can quote it.
Exactly. Like I feel like so many of the people I grew up around like didn't actually read the Bible. And to be fair, I haven't read the whole Bible. I think through reading on my own and from going to church, I've heard most of it. But that's more than enough. And I actually plan to read the whole thing. Yeah, I've been burnt out for so long. I didn't want to touch it,
Yeah.
but now I do
Yeah.
want to finish reading it, regardless of how painstaking it is, so I can really, have the best critiques and have the full understanding. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what I say today might slightly change, but I think, my rejection of Christianity is like, that's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. You may just have more examples of why.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to find more like God atrocities and, whatever.
God Atrocities with Drew,
Yes,
a new podcast.
exactly. Um, yeah, I was talking about um, lying awake at night and just this existential crisis. Um, and yeah, as I said, there's no solid evidence that there is any afterlife, although, by definition, you wouldn't really be able to test that. Um, I think it's very silly when people try to pass NDEs, not near death experiences, as, oh, this is proof of the afterlife, guys. Like, first of all, they didn't die. And second of all, like, it's it's a manifestation in your mind of what you think heaven or hell is. Like it's obviously not actual like afterlife, guys.
Right, right. But it's your brain firing off everything it needs to fire off in order to try and keep you alive.
Exactly, and like man, like the conception of hell is so messed up when you think about it because like
It's so messed up.
the Bible is clear that the path to hell is a wide one, the path to heaven is a narrow one. So that means that vast majority of humanity, including all those who don't believe, those who have never even heard of Christianity, are getting thrown into hell for eternal torture. Like that's super messed up if I'm anywhere empathetic of other human beings. Like, you might
Yeah,
as well
yep.
in that scenario, you might as well just have not created humans at all, and there wouldn't be the overwhelming, net suffering, in comparison, very little net happiness you would have in life, and for the few people in heaven.
But that just makes too much sense, Drew. I'm sorry. It sounds like you don't have faith. It sounds like you lack faith.
Sorry, guys. um, yeah, like the term faith too is like it's really about taking like the leap of faith. That's the phrase I've heard. Is like it's called faith because it's lacking in evidence, empirical evidence, whether that's science or logical thinking. Because so much of this stuff, just when you really sit down and you're honest with yourself, like doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't. Yeah. Yeah, and, like, when I say those things, part of me is, like, just joking around, but part of me is dead serious. It's like, w how can you take something that has no basis of evidence and then say, "The whole point of this is to not have evidence also. So not only do you just need to believe, but we're going to emphasize that if there is evidence, it's actually probably not biblical because the whole point is that there's no proof of this whatsoever. You're just going to believe." And then also send people to hell for having questions about it. You know what I'm saying? For having questions and not being 100% sure given the lack of evidence that they have. It's very interesting in a sad way.
Yeah, like if you really go back, I mean, I'll talk about how Christianity, the Bible, doesn't correspond at all. The fact that goes straight up against, flies in the face of archaeology, history, science, all that stuff. Like,
Mm,
and there's different shades of it too, because there's
mhm.
you know the creation story, which is harder to disprove, I guess, rather than like the young Earth creationism. Like the Earth is only 10,000 years old. Like, I'm sorry, but whoever's making that argument's about to get hella roasted by the very apparent billions of years old that the Earth is based on carbon dating and all that stuff.
Right, right. But that is also then made it to be Satan on Earth. You say, but carbon dating says that the world is 1 million years old. What are you talking about? And they go, yeah, Satan wants you to think that. Actually, that's Satan's work. And it's like, how do
It
you
almost
win?
it almost sounds like to those types of Christians that like Satan is almost or as powerful as God. Like, isn't he supposed to be only in one place at one time because he's not God?
Again, Drew, you have no faith, only sense, and it's not working. It's not
Sorry,
working. You're
guys,
gonna
I'm
wind
too
up in hell.
logical. Um, yeah, I guess going back to the narrative a little bit. So I went to college, got a little bit more serious about faith, got involved with the Navigators. They're a
What made
pretty
you get
prominent,
more involved in your faith? Like, what was it that made you think you wanted to fall back into it,
yeah,
kind of?
I guess just I thought like, hey, this is where my life needs to go, and like pressure from family and just
Yeah.
like pressuring myself to like, oh, I should be better, I should improve, I should be a better Christian, I should read more of the Bible, all that stuff. And so I got really
Mhm.
involved in study groups and worship nights on Fridays and um, things like that. I would read the Bible a lot more regularly. um, so I at one point I started reading the whole Bible, cover to cover, and I get probably I not even get halfway through the Old Testament. It's rough because there's a lot of
It's hard.
genealogy and these stories that I don't know, very detail oriented and just like whatever. Get to the fun stuff in the New Testament, Jesus,
Yeah, it's
and the
like trying to
multiple
read a Stephen King book where it's just like, "There's too many words. Just get to the story."
exactly getting to the New Testament and the very conflicting accounts of Jesus.
Yes, yes.
And I was also I'll go to like FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, on
Yep,
Wednesday nights.
yep.
I did FCA. It was a different setup, but I did it in high school too. They had it like starting at 7:30 in our private school gym, private secular school. It wasn't religious. Get quite a bit of people to attend. They had like donuts and stuff. And they'd have a speaker and do a prayer. Like this was a big FCA college, and so had like worship band and all these college people like hey, maybe a good place to go meet a significant other or something like that. Um,
Yep.
yeah, like especially with FCA, like Christians are supposed to be welcoming, community oriented, and anyone could come. And I even as a practicing Christian, I didn't really feel that. I really had to kind of beg to get people to go with me because I want to go by myself. And then when I couldn't, like I'd end up going by myself, and the most part didn't really feel a part of what was going on. Um,
Yeah.
that was it. I will say that was different than Navigators. Like it was small. It was a lot smaller, just by virtue of being smaller, and there were a lot of nice people in there. Uh, and I got close with a good bunch of them. Um, so that wasn't the issue there. Um, but yeah, that definitely impacted me, like FCA and like kind of feeling left out. Um, the other part of it that was bigger was like, as I said, getting burnt out, reading the Bible. Then in my sophomore year, like I was tired of like always failing my own expectations and those in the church. And as contrary to what I've been told, reading the Bible wasn't helping quote improve my relationship with Jesus or like feeling better.
Yes.
And I felt like I wasn't getting really anything out of it.
Yeah.
And
And you said something really important there when you talked about failing your own expectations. I feel like something that I know is prevalent in Christianity. I'm not quite sure how prevalent this is in other religions, but I've heard that it exists there as well. What Christianity does, especially in America, is they make a lot of the problems your problem. So if your prayers aren't coming true, it's because you are not praying correctly. Or if you aren't feeling joy when you go to church or when you read your Bible, it's because you are doing something incorrectly. So this idea that you say, I'm not even meeting my own standards, that's kind of run of the mill for evangelical Christianity is you never can meet your own standards, and that alone is also your fault and your problem.
yeah, and then they say like God's supposed to swoop in and like fill that void. Like you can't pick up all your sins on your own. Jesus did that. And like now I've found like I think it's more likely that he did exist, but like there's some evidence that he didn't exist. And number two, there's Bart Ehrman has a book about this that I want to read, that like this title of deity of son of God was kind of hoisted onto him, and the historical figure of Jesus wasn't even espousing or claiming that title, which is really interesting.
That is
Something I never
interesting.
would have encountered in the church.
That is interesting indeed.
Um, let's see, and then like after that, there was kind of a moment where it was Saturday morning, and I was supposed to get up early and go with the nabs and do a scavenger hunt, which I'm a big scavenger hunt guy, to be honest. But I ended up sleeping in, and I was like, yeah, I just really don't feel like it. Like, and after that, it was just I never really went to church again. Thinking about it, like I went back with two NAVS activities like the next year, which is a little surprising looking back. But it was like a lake day, like kind of fun thing, and
Yeah.
then something else like going. It was going to an amusement park. Like, not how much religion can you bake into that, you know?
Right,
I
right.
went for the fun.
Surprising amount, but still the least amount probably of all the other activities.
That's right. Um, Yeah, I really didn't touch it for a little while. It hasn't been that long. It's been 2.5 years. I started reconsidering my faith and where are the origins for it. Like, is there some coercion involved? Does this all make sense? Um, that's where I got into the leap of faith stuff. Um,
What
and
made
I
you
found
think that? Was there did something happen that made you start to think maybe there was coercion involved, or was it just kind of a natural progression of thought?
I'd say both. Like, definitely, it was a lot of self-reflection on like, what did Christianity really do for me, and like, is this all true, and what's the source? Like, the Bible, the text itself, and eventually get into lots of mistranslation issues, and like, hell doesn't even exist in the original translation. That was something I discovered recently. Like,
That's
this
wild.
whole it shows how much of a man-made construct so much of this stuff is, and it's designed to um, coerce people to give money, give their time. Um, you can do what you want with them, and socially and politically in many ways with Christianity, because you can't be gay, you can't do this, you can't have sex outside of marriage, whatever. And it's a very clever way to be able to control people. And I think,
Yes.
even if these leaders don't realize it, they heavily exploit that loophole. I mean, I won't call it a loophole, but a part of Christianity. Even you mentioned people have hoisting expectations on the people who aren't even in the Christian faith. Like gay people, like you're gonna go to hell. You don't stop being gay. Um,
I'm cured.
Burn
Thank
them.
you.
Yeah, conversion
Wow.
therapy right up.
Yes. I'm so sorry. Nobody explained that part to me. I am no longer gay. Thank you for warning me.
um, yeah, eventually, like after all this, I was like, I don't believe this anymore. I've crossed a bridge I can't go back over. Like, having faith, like that's I can't do that because I think logically, and I mean, the evidence is overwhelmingly clear, at least to me, that either the Bible isn't true. I mean, a lot of the stories and tropes are taken from pre-existing religions like Zoroastrianism, I think is how you say it, and some other very ancient
Mhm.
beliefs, the creation story. Um, and I don't think all of it's in bad faith. I said earlier that
No. Yeah.
it's used and perhaps created to control people. But I mean, with any religion, a lot of this is way before we have modern science. And how do we explain how people got here? How do we explain the seasons? And
Right.
religion provided people this outlet, although it was almost always untrue, to have some sort of consensus on these really important questions.
Yeah. And I do think that many religions were founded on good things and had good purposes. And then, for whatever reason, somewhere along the line, someone involved figured out that they could also use it to control and manipulate people, make money, right? And, like if you look back throughout history, we've had religions since nearly the dawn of time, and at least the old ones make sense, right? Like, oh, every day that I pray to the sun comes back up. Okay, I'll keep doing that. Or every day that we do this particular dance, the crops keep growing. So I guess we keep doing this dance. And that it's like, okay, that makes sense on a primitive level, to a mind that has, like you said, no other alternate method of figuring out
Frame of
facts and
reference.
evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's when you get to the point where you're saying, also, if like in the Bible, if your daughter is not a virgin when she's married, her father should stone her in the town, like publicly, because that brings shame upon the whole family, right? Or if a man marries a divorced woman, then that's adultery and he deserves to be stoned to death or he's going to go to hell. And like that's where you're like, whoa, at what point did it go from we're doing things to help the tribe survive that seemingly make sense to us to, oh, by the way, women aren't equal citizens. Here's a bunch of things that you better not be gay, you better not this, you better not that, or else you burn in eternity forever. Like what? Where did that
Yeah,
come from?
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the issues I take is this collective punishment. So you have one person who commits a sin. So many stories like this in the Bible, where one person or a couple people do something bad. They sin against God. Okay, that's on them. And then like the whole community, the whole city, maybe even the whole country is punished for it. The best example, perhaps, is Egypt, where the so pro-life God that Christians make him out to be is killing firstborn right out of the womb. So
Yes. Yes.
very pro-life indeed, I
Yeah.
guess.
And then you have Job, who didn't even sin. He was actually a very pious man who loved God, and God still wiped out his entire family, everything he worked for, everyone he loved, until he literally regretted the day he was born. He didn't even do anything. Like he was written in the Bible as a very righteous man, and the devil was like, I bet he wouldn't be if I messed around with him, and God was like, I bet. And then when Job's like, "Why would you do this?" God was like, "Actually, you made me do this, but don't worry, here's a new family." Like, okay, thanks, I guess.
And that ties in with like this very arbitrary picking of winners and losers. So you've got like, it really focuses on the Israelites, and um, because these other tribes aren't Israeli, they're bad apparently, and they've sinned against God by existing in this other ethnic group. Um,
Yep.
and
That
we
God
see that
created.
today. I didn't want to bring it up until the very end, but like with Palestine, Israel, like that whole conflict is taking a step in a new direction. But
It is.
this is a very strange scenario.
It
I
is.
don't want to go too off topic with that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, something else that's interesting when I think about it is if you look back through my Instagram posts, you can kind of see where I started and where I ended. Not so much ended up because I haven't been super talkative about it on social media. I have a lot of Christians who follow me and want to try to respect them and keep them around, maybe. But again, I'm not the one that's gonna tailor content to
Right.
something that my followers are gonna like to keep them around. Like, man, there
Exactly.
are some people unfollowing me today and yesterday for what I said about the Palestine-Israel conflict, and that's fine. Like, if people want to leave, um, that's fine, and I'll do the same. Um, but Christianity should be better about letting people leave and not coercing them with heaven and hell and um, you know
Yeah,
whatever it may be.
absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So about my Instagram. So my first post ever was a Bible verse. Very cliche, and like
I can
my
relate. I can relate.
my profile had a big Bible verse in it. It wasn't just the Hebrews 12:2. It was like all written out. It was
It
extra
wasn't
special.
John 3:16? Wow. I'm
I got a
surprised.
little bit
Sorry, are
more
you even
creative.
a real Christian if you don't put John 3:16 in your Instagram bio?
Exactly. Tim Tebow. Um, and then February 2021, I posted about my testimony about upward football in the gazebo I talked about. And that was like 2.5 months before I like kind of started deconstructing, which is kind of funny. And um, it's, I don't want to disparage anybody, but like my grandparents kind of weaponize the more religious grandparents. They've almost like weaponized that post against me. Said like,
Really?
well, you believe that, and you said all this these things about God that you believe, and you want others to come and join the faith. It's like, well, people change. We're not static. We're dynamic beings, and my brain was still developing, still is. My memory's gotten better because of my brain development. Like I've seen all these things happen in my own experience. Um, and yeah, you can't. I mean, who I was 2.5 years ago is different, and that's okay. Like we have new experiences that
That's a
may
good
change our
thing.
beliefs.
You don't wanna be the same person at 18 that you are at 30. That's a problem. Now, what direction you go in that makes you different, that can also be a problem, but if you wake up in your late 20s, early 30s, early 40s, and you haven't changed since the age of 18, there is something wrong there
Yikes!
on many levels.
Exactly. Um, Another part of it before I get into like the theology stuff is like um, during that time, um, since I've deconstructed, like that summer, I got really into like leftist politics, like socialism, like all that stuff. Um, I now identify as a socialist, and it was really interesting to look at Christianity through this new perspective. And Karl Marx has this famous quote. I'm gonna quote a part of it. Like, if you really want to interpret it, you need the whole thing. Um, but he says, religion is the side of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the masses. Um, and it's not totally against religion. Like when people have difficult material conditions, religion can be almost an escape. But on the other side of the coin, if you're trying to do a revolution and help oppress people, in slavery or whatever it may be, religion can also be a dead weight, prevent that from happening in many ways.
Yes.
Um, so it depends on religion. It depends on. I mean, there's some really radical sects of Christianity that are doing great things. There are plenty of anarchists and communist Christians, but then there are also like super Christo-fascist Christians as well, and people in between, people who maybe don't think they're very political. Um, and one of the things with politics is like this almost fetishization of poverty. Like I've had some people in my family say like, you know, kind of paraphrasing, actually some of the happiest people in the world are poor because they love God. And first of all, what are the stats on that? Like you
Yeah.
need some good evidence to say something like that. It's
Like,
more
I
of
don't
a
remember
shot in
reading
the
that on
dark.
NPR. Maybe it was that on NPR and I just missed it.
Yeah. And some of my family sent this in the family group chat, which can get a little spicy sometimes.
Yeah.
And the post said it wasn't from her. Said the poorest person is not the one without money, it is the one without God. And I'm sitting here, I haven't texted it, maybe I won't. But I've said, all right, guys, then because my family's pretty affluent. First of all, they're certainly not poor. Um, I'm like, okay, drop everything you have right now, go be a homeless poor. Don't oh no, you don't actually want to be like Jesus who called his followers to drop everything and pursue him. Well, your refusal to do so tells me everything I need to know about that claim.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's also like, tell that to my landlord when I try to pay him in God. He's gonna disagree with you entirely, you know?
Yeah, I mean, people in, the bourgeois, the upper class, the capitalists, they can totally use religion to justify their positions they already have. They can morph the Bible, even if it's, you know, I don't think it's a good faith interpretation of the Bible these people make when they're post hoc justifying their positions. So they ignore verses like, I love this one, Luke 18:25, quote, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God."
I was
Funny how
just about to
I've
bring
like
that
never
up.
heard that one before.
Yes, I was just about to bring that up. I was like, "Oh, so they're gonna give it all away before they die so that they make it into heaven? Is that what's gonna happen? Is that what they're gonna do? They're just gonna give it all away? They're gonna live like a pauper their last year of their life? Let me know how that goes."
And it's so two-faced. Yeah, I have a little bit of notes here about the Catholic Church and their horrific history of um, from the Crusades to indulgences and um, the ability to coerce people. You got to give money to get into heaven, guys. So all the poors, you give me your money, and we'll take good care of it. And it's like so two-faced because these people at the top of the clergy and the Joel Austins of the world and whoever else, like they're very loaded. Like some of them are blatant about, they use that money to fund jets and like all this crazy stuff, and yet they expect their followers to blindly follow them, give them all their money,
Yeah,
and not be so many Americans struggle. Like most of us can't even afford a $500 $600 emergency expense, and unfortunately, it's getting worse. The position of
and
the working class.
they also keep their churches closed during natural disasters. They have thousands and thousands of seats that people can use during snowstorms, during floods, during tornadoes, and they lock that church so fast when it comes to helping the homeless.
I remember seeing tweets about that. I forget what the natural disaster was, but Joel Osteen's church in I think Houston, and
Mhm.
yep, they weren't opening it. Yeah, it was more advantageous to keep it closed. And no, I don't want to misportray every Christian
Right.
as that, because there are plenty of regardless of whether I agree with their theology or not, but there are a lot of churches out there doing objectively good things to help people.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
doing charity and helping the homeless and providing food. Now, I still don't think people should have to go through religious institutions to get to meet their material needs. I think it's very coercive,
Exactly.
and I think a lot of that money can be poorly managed because of religious intuitions and
Exactly.
superstitions. Um, so I prefer, what I call proletariat the working people that democratically decide on how money and resources are distributed. Um,
Right. Right. And it's one of those things where it's like if you want to do good for people, which I genuinely believe most Christians do, there can't be a there can't always be a caveat. Like, if you wanna give food to the homeless, they shouldn't have to sit through a sermon while they're eating. If you wanna
yeah,
go and donate your clothes, you shouldn't tell them about God's grace while you're handing them those clothes or that money on the street. Like, there doesn't need to be if helping people is truly what you wanna do, I think the help should come first. You should give with a joyful spirit and a joyful heart. And
yeah,
then later, if that person you helped wants to find out, like, who is this that's providing these things for me? Like, where is this coming from? Then you can say, after
yeah.
they've consented to the conversation, oh, I'm with this church, or I'm a Christian, or this and that and the other. But this idea that, oh, you want food today? Great, come on in. We're just going to make you listen to a sermon also while you're eating. Don't mind us.
Yeah, it's you touched on this very chauvinist aspect of Christianity where, you have to go through me to get this thing and I know better
Yes.
than you. Like, isn't a more authentic display of faith is to actually display it, and to do the right actions to help people to be empathetic. And
Yes.
then you you bring in, hey, I'm a Christian, like that
Yeah.
influences the things I've just done. That that makes a lot more sense, and I think people, who aren't Christian would be a lot more open to that tactic.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
absolutely.
And then the last thing before I get into more dense theology is like just I think one of the greatest mistakes of the evangelical church in the 21st century is I mean, I would call it worship of President Trump and, um, the GOP in many ways. Um, thinking or deluding themselves into thinking Trump is even a Christian. He didn't even pretend to go to church. He, curses and he abuses women, openly talks about it, um, and abuses his workers, and creates fake universities that throw a bunch of people out in the bathwater. Um, and yeah, and then, oh, now it's politically expedient 2016, 2017 for Trump to pretend to feign his faith in Christianity because we all know that the evangelical voting bloc is a huge factor in elections. They vote disproportionately, they as a whole, and they vote disproportionately for the Republicans,
Yep.
whoever's running on the red side of things.
Yes, 100%. And again, it's this dangerous narrative of there's supposed to be a separation between church and state, but when the political climate gets as charged as it was in 2016, you have these pastors of these giant churches who feel so many feelings saying, "You know what? I'm going to say what they don't want me to say. If you vote blue, you're not a Christian." Right? Like, in the middle of church. One of my best friends is a Christian and she had to leave her church because they wouldn't stop getting political in the pulpit. And she's like, "That's not what I'm here for. Even if it's the same party as you, even if they're saying things that you agree with, that's not the time and the place." And you should be worried. You should be worried if your pastor starts telling you you're not a real Christian if you don't vote for literally anyone. It doesn't even have to be Trump. If a pastor told me I'm not a real Christian if I don't vote for Biden, that's just as problematic. And that's
Right.
a thing. I think that's something that they don't understand about people like you and me is they think, "Oh, you have a problem with me talking about Trump in church." It's like, "Well, yeah, but not just Trump." Like, "Yeah, I don't want you to talk about Trump ever because I'm so sick of hearing about that guy." But if you were to preach about anyone being the right president from the pulpit, that is abusive and it's manipulative and it's coercion and it's illegal, or it should be. I'm sure
The Hyde
there's a
Amendment,
loophole
I
somewhere.
don't think the Hyde Amendment goes far enough, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
speed running about how close can we get to violating the Hyde Amendment. It's too
Yes.
specific. It should be more
Yes.
broad, but
Yes, and I'm
whatever.
sure they also get away with it because, like, the same way that they're tax exempt, I'm sure there is some phrasing or loophole somewhere that allows them to get
Exactly.
away with that. But it's just, if you wouldn't want your child's teacher saying these things in their school, why would you say it in the pulpit, you know?
Yeah, like what you mentioned with, this very open display of, oh, I support this, you should hate that. Like, I don't know, ironically, one of the best ways to get people to leave your church that happen to be Democrats or in the middle or have certain critiques of Trump or whoever it is that they're promoting. Um, yeah, it's like kind of um, sabotaging yourself from the perspective of the church. Um,
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but if some like, let's say you've got a congregation of 1,500 people. If 1,000 of those people stick around after you do something like that, are those people you wanna associate with? Like, do you wanna be followed around by those people? Like, I would not.
yeah, yikes. Yeah, you have to do so many mental gymnastics to, for someone like Trump and whatever. Yeah, it's it's really it's kind of entertaining to watch actually. The whole QAnon. I've there's another subreddit called r/QAnon casualties. Man, it gets really bad really quickly. These so many of these people have gone down these far right rabbit holes mixed in with like some very biased religious, Christian stuff, and I'm glad I don't have anyone around me who has been like that because that would be a whole nother ball game.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think the or if there will be one at all, do you think there would be a familial reaction to, say, the conversation that we're having right now? Say if your grandparents or your parents heard this episode, what do you think the reaction would be?
um, I've only told them bits and pieces of everything. I don't think they'd be surprised. I think they still very much love me, and really,
Yeah.
when it comes to most day to day things, we do our thing, and they'll go to church, wake up on Sunday morning, really not that early, and I'll sleep in. And my grandparents let me do that too. I respect that. They respect to some degree, what I've chosen.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I think, obviously they're not happy because from their perspective, they think like, man, this kid's going to hell, and uh, we're gonna have to leave it up to God. I don't know, you know, I don't know if they feel like they can do that much, but I don't know.
It's probably one of those they've been told by a friend, like, "You have to let him do what he's gonna do, he'll come back eventually, but if you try to stop him, he'll just run further and further away."
Yeah, and as I've said, like gonna read the Bible, gonna finish reading it
Yeah.
as best I can. My dad has also recommended a book by Lee Strobel. Um, is it Mere Christianity? It's one of those kind of classic Christian books, like convincing someone who is scientifically oriented or empirically oriented about why Christianity is true. Like I'll read it. I've read a terrible book by the Epic Times by the Falun Gong, the religious cult originally from China, about the specter of communism. As basically a communist myself, so I've read some things I heavily disagree with, and things that I will just mark the hell out of with sticky notes because it's a lot of claims in a relatively short, um, insane claims in a relatively short book.
Wow.
So yeah, I guess moving on to theology and some of the issues I take and just thinking logically through Christianity. Yeah, I think talked about a little bit, but the selfishness of striving for heaven, um, being forced to worship a narcissistic God. Um, I really think deep down a lot of people stay in Christianity to save themselves, this promise to save themselves, which has never been proven, obviously. Um, sometimes to the detriment of others, whether it's people taking money from others or conversion therapy or crusades or whatever it may be. And as I've said, like the Bible doesn't align at all with historical, biological,
Yes.
archaeological, other empirical evidence that we have. I think it was on your show. I heard someone mention that Noah's Ark wouldn't make any sense because just on one fact alone, that
Yes.
all the poop would have produced so much sulfur or whatever.
Yes. That was my
Everyone would
friend
have died.
Godless Granny. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, that was a great interview. Um, I actually subscribe to her channel. I
Yeah,
have
she's
so many
wonderful.
subscriptions.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I really talked about the narratives from previous religions that have been borrowed by the Bible. Touching on that this isn't some divine inspiration given to us. It was so many ways clearly man-made and man-constructed, and you know, um, that's the other thing, right? Is translation and how there's no two translations that are alike. There's um, so many differences between them, and it really makes you think like if if God is so all powerful, why couldn't He just preserve the holy book throughout time and just make it clear and concise that this is what you're reading today is what was 2,000 plus years ago.
Yes, yes, 100%. And what gets me is I've said this before, I think, on episodes. If hearsay is not admissible in the court of law because we understand that somebody telling you that somebody else said something isn't necessarily fact and can't be verified as true. Why is it then the basis of our entire salvation as human beings? It's not admissible in court to get a robber put in jail. It's not admissible in court to get that, DUI taken off your record. But when it comes to heaven and hell, your eternal salvation, the rules for what you're supposed to do to worship God, the Bible is entirely hearsay. And what isn't hearsay is basically fables, right? The equivalent of Aesop's fables. Like, I don't think Jonah was actually swallowed by a whale, but I get the message. I don't think Adam and Eve are where all humans came from, but I get the message. I get what they're trying to say. I don't agree with it, but I get what they're trying to say. So many parts of the Bible are literally fictitious fables that I think were written to be fictitious fables. And somebody along the line went, no, no, they meant it literally. And the rest of the Bible is hearsay. So why is it that it makes perfect sense to everybody when it comes to charging you with a crime, but it suddenly doesn't count, and it's flawless and it's inherently perfect when it comes to the rules of your literal salvation? I do think Jesus was a real man. I think
I think
he
that's very
just
likely. Yeah.
I think he was just ahead of his time. For example, I was telling somebody the other day, if he washed his hands before he touched somebody's wound and their wound didn't get worse, they would have thought that was a miracle. If he just knew a little bit more about, like, I don't know, get the dirt off that thing before you eat it, they're like, my God, nobody's
Wow.
died since Jesus has been here. Wow. Right? Like, maybe he knew a little bit more about fermenting wine and it was healthier to drink, and maybe it also killed some bacteria. He's a miracle worker. I do think he was real, but I think he was just a wise individual who washed his hands and had some decent advice. And people took that and they ran with it. And the game of telephone 2,000 years later, here we are being like, no, no, this is literal fact.
It's funny how the last 2,000 years, whenever the Bible's written, no one has ever noticed any of these miracles. No turning water into wine. There's no Jesus to be found. There's no any evidence, any rational evidence of a God. Never mind the Christian God.
Yep. Yep. And that's coming from somebody who I spent years on my knees begging God for a sign. I wanted to be the perfect Christian. I'm not somebody who's been on this crusade against God. I still am not. I'm still not on a crusade against God because I don't think he's like, you can't be on a crusade against something that's not real. But
Exactly.
like, but like also like if
The
people are
biggest
like, you
straw
hate
man.
God, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't believe in God. Like
That's
that's
the biggest
it,
straw man. Like one of the biggest straw mans I see Christians use for atheists, because I'm not I don't consider myself an atheist, like
mhm,
in a positive sense of like I can
mhm,
prove that God doesn't exist because by definition you can't really prove that.
yeah.
Although there are many wonderful atheists out there who have great arguments. Um, but man, what was I going to say? Like, what were we talking about?
Oh, we
Sorry,
were
I
talking about how you can't hate God if you don't think he's real.
yeah, like
Like
that doesn't
that's
make any sense.
impossible.
Like Christians will say like, um, oh, they just hate God. No, they don't think God exists at
No.
all. It's like
Yeah.
so far out of their conception to think like, oh, maybe like God just doesn't exist. Like, you know?
Exactly. And especially when I do identify as an atheist, and when I tell people I don't think there's anything after we die, they're like, "Oh, so you think we're just in an eternal blackness?" And I'm like, "No, there's nothing." And they're
You're
like,
not
"Oh, so
conscious anymore.
yeah, you're wandering around in the dark." No, there's literally not, like, lights out, no conscious, because
Yeah, I agree
you
with that.
can't wrap your brain around that lack of consciousness.
Right. Well, Good Mythical Morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Well, Link and Rhett, they had this great series about it, and I think I watched like all their videos, podcasts about it. And
Yeah.
they were talking about some actor, I can't remember his name, but he basically said, "Do you remember what it was like before you were born?" No? Well, that's how it's gonna be after you die, like, you didn't have consciousness, do you remember, like, all of eternity before you were born? And, like, in many ways, it's comforting, I mean, certainly more comforting than, me and nearly everyone else on the planet eternally is tortured forever in a lake of fire. I prefer the former option for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, if you've ever been under anesthesia,
I
it you
have, many
it's
times.
nothing, right? Like, you don't remember it. It's not, "Oh, blackness for an hour behind my eyelids, I'm wandering," and not like, and then you're
Nope.
back. Like,
Yep.
yeah, it's hard to describe otherwise, but I always ask people if they've been under anesthesia, because that is the most nothingness I've ever experienced, and quite frankly, it was delightful, and I would go back. Like, it was
I
nice, best
personally
sleep I've
don't
ever had.
prefer I personally don't prefer the process of actually being put to sleep because
Right,
it's
that's
just
pretty
kind of
scary.
artificial. I've had a lot
Yeah.
of surgeries in my ear, but yeah, like the actual being asleep part, like, yeah, you don't remember anything. You're not
Nothing,
conscious.
nothing.
And like, I guess this ties in a little bit to my point about, I call it Schrodinger's Jesus. If you're familiar with Schrodinger's box, the half dead, half alive cat. Can't be both man and God. If he has one quality, it negates the other quality. He can't be both mortal and God. Um, could not really have died for our sins if he rose up on the third day. Like these very, pretty basic things. But if you grow up in the Christian community, like you don't allow yourself room to like think like, wait a second, does this actually make sense?
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. If somebody like, if you bought a woman a Coach purse and she's like, "Why did you get me such an extravagant gift?" And you're like, "Because I love you." And then you return it 3 days later and you get your money back. Was that really a financial sacrifice for her? Was that a gift? Or did you just end up taking it back, right? Like, okay, so Jesus died for our sins. One, he clearly didn't want to. It was non-consensual. So let's talk about that. How he literally wept in the garden and he just succumbed to the fact that his dad was going to make him do it. Like,
Can I
I
add
feel
on
bad
to
for
that?
Jesus. Yeah.
Can, the non-consensual acts, content warning here, but Mary got impregnated by God against her will.
Yes.
That was really messed up.
Yes, at a time where you were supposed to stone your daughters to death for not being virgins on their wedding night.
Oh,
God
wow.
set the rule, and then he's like, "Oh, you know what would be real risky? If I just impregnate this teenager and
And the other
hope
thing
that people
about
believe her."
the other thing, assuming that you believe that somehow this divine being we've never experienced did something like that. Like we all know, we all learn in school, we all learn, from the book that our parents give us that conception happens between two people and coming together. But like since God was involved and not Joseph. The bloodline of Abraham doesn't get transferred to Jesus as the prophecy. That's the prophecy is that Jesus is descended from Abraham, the tribe. Um, so that doesn't check out. And it's again it's simple, but you have to allow yourself room to like you know pick up these pieces of information and put them together.
But then if you do that, you find out your whole life has been a lie. So it's easier to not do that and hope for the best. People say a lot of times, one of the things that bother me the most is when they say, "I would rather do it and find out I didn't need to at the end of my life and, no harm, no foul, than not follow it and find out by the end of my life that I should have. But what they don't understand is the harm in the wake of their Christian identity, right? You may think, "Oh, I'm not harming anyone by being a Christian just by chance. I'm not harming anyone by just by chance, just in case, like an insurance policy, I'm going to be a Christian." Okay, well, every LGBTQ person in your life knows that you're an evangelical Christian. Well, they've never said anything. Yeah, they've never said anything to you about it. Like they're not going to tell you. They've learned their lesson. They're not going to talk to you about your thoughts on their lifestyle. And just calling yourself an evangelical Christian can be harmful because you have people who care about you who feel like they can't express themselves in certain ways because you're going to call them a sinner. You have traumas related to your own religion, right? You have traumas related to sex and romance and bodily autonomy. If you're a girl, you're tasked with the idea of keeping a man's eyes away from your cleavage and your shoulders, even though Jesus himself says, spoon your eyes out if you can't stop looking at her cleave, although he says it differently. Like you say no harm, no foul, but there's so much harm done. There's so much harm done that you don't even know. You don't even have the consciousness to understand how harmful that label can be if you really are living it and you really are going by it and you really are telling people that's what you believe.
Totally. And you brought up something that was like the next to my list, which is patriarchy, and that is something that bothered me really even before I started deconstructing. Like, why, do men get the upper hand by virtue of being men over women? And I kind of consider myself a feminist. Like even my
Mhm.
freshman year of college, and was involved in a women's march. Because like the first couple of months of college are the like red period where it's like the most sexual assaults happen
Wow.
on campus, and Trump was in office and things like that. Although that doesn't go away when Trump's out of office, obviously. But
Yeah, it doesn't help either.
no, of course not. This arbitrary men above women, and again, a lot of the reason goes back to this collective punishment of all women because Eve sinned, even though Adam sinned too. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Women
Right.
being relegated to the domestic space, barefoot, make babies, take care of the babies when they
Don't
grow,
preach. Don't you dare
and then
preach.
yeah, they can't preach. Now it depends a little bit the church. Like there are some Episcopalian churches and things like that where they're very affirming of women and
But they're
queer
not
people.
real Christians, Drew. They're not
I've
real
heard that argument so
Christians.
many times. Yeah. And then there are churches where it's like complete opposite. Like you have to wear even a veil in the church space, or you're absolutely forbidden from preaching in front of men. All the churches I went to were like all men in leadership and all men, preaching, and I think it's very telling. Um,
Yes.
I've talked about it a little bit, but yeah, how are we supposed to trust a God who can't even follow his own 10 commandments? Like, there's an estimate of genocide from God. He killed like 20 million people in the Bible. Killing an entire town for something someone did, or
Yep.
whatever it may be. But God's like a pretty darn evil figure in the Bible if you really think about
Yes.
it.
And you know what? I'll say this. I don't know if you're familiar with Calvinism, but I've said this before and I've said it again. Calvinists at least stick by the story, right? So when you talk to a Baptist or when you talk to a Methodist or when you talk to a Presbyterian and you're like, "What about all the evil that happened in the Bible?" "No, it was a different time. That's a metaphor. What he meant was," Calvinists are like, "Yep, he did. He killed all
All
those
right.
people." And you're like, "Oh, okay." And they're like, "Yep." And you're like,
Totally
"So,
justified.
yeah," you're like, "So you believe that God killed all those babies?" "Mhm." It's like, and you believe, like, some of
You're
us are
proud of
gonna
that?
go to hell. Yeah, like, I will say what I will say is, it's awful, but at least they own what the real Bible says. Like, when they call themselves Bible literalists, they go with it. Now, whether or not they condone it is different, but at least they say, "Those are the rules. The rules might suck, you might not like them, but those are the rules. That's what God did. He said what he said." Like that GIF, "I said what I said." Like, make no mistake, Calvinists believe the Bible is literal. At least they're not lying about it. It's a terrible thing to have to think is reality, but at least they're sticking to their story and they're remaining consistent about what the Bible says versus what is true and what is real.
I respect that part because I think I haven't met a lot of Calvinists, at least openly. I know one of my friend's brothers who grew up Mormon. They have a huge Mormon family. He converted Calvinism for his
Very
girlfriend,
scary.
basically.
Oh,
That's very interesting.
whew. That's Calvinism is very scary. They are like, I'm not afraid of anybody, and I'm kind of scared of Calvinists, is what I'll say.
Yeah. I mean, but yeah, I kind of respect that because for pretty much all the other Christians, they have to do so many mental gymnastics. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna pick this part that I think is literal. I'm gonna pick this part I think is literal. Um, and there's no people are just literally just pulling it out of their ass, to put it lightly.
Yes.
They're making it
Yes.
up. What it's totally subjective whether I put this is literal or this is not.
Whether it benefits me or not is what I decide is real in the Bible and what's not, you know?
Yeah,
And that you're
exactly.
just
So
like,
at that point, everyone can create their own personally curated theology, just like a
yes.
Spotify playlist, you know?
Yes, yes, build your own salvation.
That
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
um, and another thing I think we talked about a little bit, but why does an all-powerful and omniscient God need to be worshipped? Why is he like such a Karen, constantly demanding, us or Israelites in the Old Testament to worship him no matter what? He's always having to, you know, do his new thing, like drop. Ooh, God's dropped the 10 Commandments. Cool guys, check them out. Why
Yes.
does a supposedly all-powerful being try so hard to make people, worship him?
He sounds like a pick me, if I had to be honest. The only difference is if you don't pick him, you burn forever. So he's like the ultimate pick me.
And he's the decider of all the moral values. Like they're
Yes.
really very arbitrary when you think, you know, when it comes down when you ask a Christian why this is, maybe you ask a Calvinist why these 20 million murders are justified. They'll say, well, that's up to God, and God's values aren't very consistent, to put it
Right,
lightly.
right, and yet, the same exact people who worship a God who's volatile and a murderer and a rapist, in the case of Mary and this and that and the other, when you bring up gods like Zeus, they're like, "That's ridiculous." Like, he had a temper, he was like this and that and the other, like, I would never believe in Zeus, like, what's there to believe in, right? And you're like, "It is the same." At least Zeus was honest about the fact that he had anger problems and, like, struck people with lightning, right? God was like, "I don't know, I'll just send a bunch of locusts to eat all your crops and
I'm
slowly
gonna
kill you as opposed
I'm
to
gonna
murder
flood
you
the whole
quick."
earth to kill everyone except my loyal, devoted followers.
Yeah, yeah. And even then, look at Job. Sometimes he still does it anyway when he just feels like it, when there's a good bet going on with the devil.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I feel
again,
like you got me
content
fired
warning.
up.
Yeah, again, content warning. I'm going to talk a little bit about sexual assault again because that is something that really troubled me.
Yeah.
Kind of, I guess when I was leaving, it came out about Ravi Zacharias. And by the way, I'd seen him speak. I went to I can't think of it, the big conference in Atlanta.
I
The
know I
Passion
was gonna
Conference.
say, I couldn't remember the word, but I know what you're talking about.
They had like Tim Tebow and Ravi and all the big Christian superstars basically, and the new Superdome in Atlanta is huge. Um, but seeing that this isn't just an isolated thing of a few rotten apples here or here like they do with the police debate, but this is a systemic thing where we've allowed people to command this authority. Oh, they're deferring to God. They're God's messengers. They may not put it like that, but this person's in this authority. They've been bestowed by God to teach your children, and it allows them to put themselves in situations if they have malicious intent to easily assault and worse with people.
Yep.
And they use their position to cover it up. And you see with
Yes.
the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, as well as other churches where they have entire lists of people they knew were doing these things, and they purposely covered up. They refused to share it with law enforcement They refuse to reach out and help victims, and in many cases, they try to disparage victims and deny their stories.
Yep.
Um, and that's not a system that I'm, you know, going to support at all.
Yeah.
That does that and prioritizes its own image over actually taking care of its people.
Yeah. And turn around and point at the Catholics and go, "Y'all are disgusting. Y'all are disgusting because of all this stuff coming out." And you're like, "Pot calling the kettle black? I don't understand." Like, what, you were so busy pointing at Catholic priests and the drama that they're in that you just skipped over the part that you're literally hiding people that are guilty of the exact same stuff. They just don't wear big fancy robes.
There's a Bible verse that applies to that too, like pull out the plank in your own eye before you complain about the needles in the other's eyes.
Yes, yes.
Where'd
Right,
that verse
exactly.
go?
Oh, I don't it was a metaphor, it was a different time.
Totally. um, it's just the Bible's so malleable and self-contradictory. I mean, you can really use it. You can use it to do great things, or like charity and legitimately helping people out. And
Right.
then the other side, you can use it to justify slavery,
Yes.
segregation, misogyny,
Yes.
homophobia. Like the Bible
Yes.
is heavily used in pre-Civil War, especially Southern U.S., really the whole U.S., to justify slave owners and the practice of slavery. These are inferior tribes, like
Yes.
Israel. Like it's very disturbing. And the Crusades and
Yeah.
indulgences, like it can just, if you have pre-existing notions and beliefs, especially politically or whatever, um, you can purposely choose not to interpret the Bible as you think it was written, which is supposed to be the hallmark of faith, that you objectively interpret the Bible for what God intended, and yet you seem to use it to make your own will happen while abusing people on the way.
Right, and I honestly think that Christianity has done more good without the Bible than with the Bible. If you say, "Oh, I follow," like, for example, I know a lot of Christians who they just say they follow the teachings of Jesus. They don't agree with anything else in the Bible, they say they follow the teachings of Jesus. Way more sense. Makes way
Way
more sense.
better.
Okay, treat everybody with respect, don't use the church to make money, turn water into wine, but, like,
Don't be a rich asshole.
right, don't be a rich ass. Like, makes so much more sense. I always try to stress to people, my problem is not with the idea of a god. My problem is with Christianity. My problem is with organized religion. If you say, I'm going to be a good person because Jesus has a lot of teachings that I relate to, and that's like, I'm a Jesus follower, I'm a Christ follower, good for you. I've seen a lot of really wonderful things done in the name of Jesus. I have not, however, seen nearly as many things done in the name of evangelical or fundamentalist Christianity. Big difference there.
Yep. And there's a huge, huge lobby of evangelical Christians, going all the way back to the moral majority. And they use this money not just to impose their views on Christians, even other sects, but everyone else who's either other religion or not religious at all, through the
Yep.
government, through accommodationalism. We have not taken our separation of church and state seriously, which, with all my criticisms of the Constitution and the founding fathers, I think both were atrocious.
Yep.
In so many ways. But I think one of the few things they got right was, we should separate church and state, because they'd seen firsthand what happens when you have a monarchy, and you don't have to have a monarchy to have this, horrendous mixing of church and state um, that we have even today. I would argue,
Yes. 100%. 100%.
and I guess the last thing on theology I would say is like, I found certainly, I mentioned that I grew up praying from a very early age. That was my nightly routine. Um, and I figured out, more recently that prayers are really futile. You're supposed
Yep.
to receive a yes, no, or maybe. That's kind of what I heard and what I kind of stuck with. And
Yep.
well, I didn't receive any of the above. I never received any response or communication. A relationship with Jesus or God is is supposed to be a two-way relationship, two-way communication, and it was basically me screaming to a void, literally or metaphorically. Um,
Yes.
that was proof enough, if not a lot, for me to realize, like, yeah, this is bull crap.
Yes, 100%. Like I said, I wanted to be the perfect Christian. I wanted to be the best Christian I could possibly be. I begged God every night to show me a sign, literally any kind of sign. I was like, it could be anything at all. It could be move this book, make it fall off the shelf, and I will spend the rest of my life worshiping you. And I I began to think he either isn't real or he's so cruel that he knows exactly what it would take to get me to follow him for the rest of my life, and he's not gonna show me just because he has time to test me. He just has the time, and instead of, solving the wars happening or the starvation or the deaths or the pandemics, he's instead just gonna mess with a 12-year-old in Arkansas and not knock that book off a shelf because he just wants to see, is she gonna stick around or not? And it's either way, it's like, even if God is real, is that a God you want to serve? Is that somebody who's just and kind and
Exactly.
loving and all the things that the hymns tell you that he is? Absolutely not. That is an abusive relationship. The
It really
definition of
is.
an
It's a
abusive
hallmark
relationship.
abusive relationship, and that's why we
Yes.
see so much, um, whether it be, parents abusing their kids, or I talked about SA earlier.
Yep.
So much abuse perpetuated and encouraged by a lot of these churches and individual practitioners of Christianity, especially in the evangelical sense. Um, it's like, it's really messed up.
It's very
But
messed up. It is. It is.
yeah, yeah. I guess I was just gonna say, like, as I said, I'm agnostic. That's what I choose to identify as. I
Yeah.
may change. Who knows?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I
And
don't
see,
think
that's
there's a
good.
way.
I think it's wonderful that you're always like
Yeah,
open to change and the idea of change.
yeah. Like, there's no way. By definition, there's no way to really determine whether God exists. It's not something you can do some sort of study for. Um,
Right.
I've had family members tell me, at least one, like, "Oh, you're one of those people who's super, not deep thinking, but analytical, I guess, and you have to see evidence for it." And he'll provide it. He'll appear to you, or like appear some metaphysical way. It's like, all right, I'll wait for it, but something
Yeah.
tells me, like, that's not gonna
Yeah,
happen.
and again, if that's all it takes and he's still not gonna do it, is that somebody you wanna dedicate your life to? Is
That's
that
not
somebody whose
someone who's
rules.
willing to actually save his children.
Right, exactly, exactly, and that's certainly not somebody who's pro-life.
Exactly.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yikes, but we don't wanna have that conversation. So for you personally, are you when you think of your upbringing, when you think of growing up in the church, in the evangelical church, are you fine with it? Are you resentful? Are you interested? Like, what feelings come up for you when you think of your background and how you were raised?
Yeah, I actually touched on this, couple of my last notes here on my page. Pages, I have 6 of them. I write a lot. But yeah, I'm kind of grateful for it in a lot of ways. Number one, through this process, I was not abused or harmed in any serious way. I think there's a
Yeah,
lot of systemic psychological harm that I wouldn't hoist onto, like, individual people, like my parents or a certain
right,
pastor. Like, I've been pretty lucky. Others maybe not, especially if
right,
they're queer, or a certain race that sticks out from the very white congregations you often see, or whatever
right,
else.
right.
People have a different political perspective. Um, and number two, I have a much firmer ground and knowledge when it comes to challenging, like, rabid religious dogma, whether it be Christianity or whether it be something else, and just arguing logically.
That's awesome. And I what I'm about to say, I do not mean to sound patronizing at all. Like it might sound patronizing. I swear I don't. For only being 22 years old, you have a a truly immaculate grasp on self-awareness, on the idea of, say, like, change, just this idea that you sit here and you're like, I'm not gonna be the same person in a few years. Just this, like, this embracing of knowing about yourself that you will eventually change and you won't be the same person, and not using labels. Because I feel like, especially when I was 22, I felt like labels were all, I just wanted those labels. I want, no, this is who I am. Like, it is embarrassing, the things that you couldn't tell me nothing. Like, I was a Republican Baptist Christian girl, and that's who I was. And if you try to question me, I'm just going to tell you it's not my job to explain it to you, which was my way of saying I don't know the answer to the question you're asking. But it's relief. It's a relief to meet somebody like you, who is 22 years old, a recent college graduate, who is like, I'm going to research, I'm going to figure it out, I'm going to question everything, I'm going to approach these topics with like respect and interest and intrigue. It's awesome. It's really wonderful. And so when I was reading that email you sent me, I just thought, like, I think I told you before we were on the record, it was written in a way where I was looking for a middle-aged person when I was going all over the internet looking for your profiles and stuff like that, because you just have this wisdom that it's awesome, but it's also tragic that so many people in places like the evangelical church and fundamentalist churches will never experience that same curiosity and that same wisdom and that same willingness to be flexible and to learn and to change and to grow and to embrace the idea that your thoughts and opinions will change over time. And I just think it's awesome. And I'm stoked that that's who you are as a person. I'm stoked you exist, is what I'm saying, Drew.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, no
I
problem.
resented change for a long time and was stuck in the same rut in many ways. Um, I think when I was in high school, like I started kind of Wikipedia surfing and like just discovering different things and
Yeah.
being a little bit more open logically. And um, grew up in a very conservative household and kind of went back and forth in that for a while, but ended up becoming going the more progressive, and then where I am now, I'm just flat out socialist, unapologetically. But but yeah, it's definitely been a progression, and now it's easier to deal with a world where you acknowledge that change exists and change can impact you, rather than try to fight it all try to fight it all the time. Material conditions will change. Um,
Right.
I will change. I learn more about, um, even Christianity and about myself like every day. Um,
Yes.
so we should try to be open to that.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And if you had any advice, say somebody's listening to this and maybe they're your age, maybe they're a lot older, maybe they are middle aged and they're just now kind of dipping their toe into this secular realm, maybe they're deconstructing. What advice would you give for them? What would you say to somebody who's looking to find the same seeming peace and interest that you have and curiosity that you have? What would you say to somebody looking for that?
I think it's kind of cliche, but listen to others who have different perspectives, backgrounds, even religions. Just you can't stay stuck inside your whole bubble forever and not
Right.
expect it to burst at least some ways at some point. Um, because there's such a wealth of knowledge out there, especially with the internet with telephones and all kinds of stuff that we really have access. We're very lucky to have live in a time where we have so much access to technology and information. I for one wouldn't be alive without living in this modern era. I mentioned I've had some issues with my ear. Um, Cholesteatoma, where if it doesn't get treated, it would have gone to my brain and killed me. Instead of
Oh,
now I only have half hearing loss. I prefer that to not being alive anymore. So that's
yes.
nice, and I'm
Yes.
grateful for things like that that are very obvious and apparent and could be empirically proven rather than oh God saved me, but also God started something like he put the cholesteatoma in me or allowed it to happen.
Yes. Yes. That's great. I lost a kidney when I was 21. I almost died of kidney failure, and I say the same thing. People are like, "Well, aren't you grateful to God that he saved you?" I'm like, "No, I'm pissed that he took my kidney. I am upset. I could have used it." Um, but, jokes aside, well, I know that I've kept you 40 minutes at least past when I said probably closer to 50, but I just wanted to say I really appreciate your time. Thank you for reaching out to be a guest on my show. For anybody listening, I'm actually going to promote Drew's podcast in the comments. You can check it out. It's not about deconstruction. It's about literally everything else. I mean, you run the gamut. You and your cousin run the gamut on your podcast. It is really fantastic.
Our interests just go everywhere. We can't seem
All
to
over the place.
focus on one thing. So
Yeah, which is great, which I think is wonderful. I feel like everyone listening to this will find something they're interested in based on just the first couple of scrolls that I did looking at your episodes.
we go from
Um,
like college football, we love college football, to imperialism, to
yeah,
food, just
yeah.
everything.
Yeah, I literally did a double take the first time I looked at your podcast because the first one was, like, sports related, and I was like, "Okay, he told me he likes soccer, this is probably gonna be like a wait, hold on, wait, am I on the same this is the same? Oh, this is the same." But I think that's wonderful. So everybody go check that out, and, Drew, thank you so much again for your time and your wisdom and your opinion, and it's been a joy having you on this episode.
Thank you for having me. It's been absolutely wonderful.